When you're working together in a team, it feels really good. You've all got your bit, you've got your time to shine, you've got your time to support your colleagues, and yeah, there's no prizes for finishing first. It's a little bit like culture. I mean, culture is what you do. You can aspire to have a culture. The culture is actually the behavior that's happening. I think the same with strategy. You can aspire to have a strategy, but if actually you're delivering X when the strategy says deliver Y, well, you're not following along. If you can keep a little journal or a kudos folder when people are sending you feedback, ask for feedback if you're not getting it, but then you can go back and remember all the times that you did bring value. You remember that yourself.
Welcome to the TechWaka podcast, where we dive into the journeys of New Zealand's top tech leaders. Your host for today is Jakub, bringing you conversations with tech leaders and innovators from across Aotearoa. Join us as we uncover the experiences, challenges and successes that shape our tech community.
Kia ora. Welcome to this episode of the TechWaka podcast. Today I'm excited to have Rachel Collingridge, the head of engineering at Totara, share her unique story and insights with us. Rachel's journey is a testament to the power of following one's passion, from mastering the clarinet to leading engineering teams. Join us as Rachel delves into her approach to taking on new roles, the significance of asking the right questions, and how her background in music influences her leadership style. Rachel's story is bound to inspire and enlighten, so let's dive in. Hello, Rachel. How are you doing?
Hi, Jakub. I'm very good this lovely Monday evening. Thank you.
And where are you based? Are you in Wellington?
Yep, based in Wellington in the sunny, well, it's a bit foggy suburb of Karori, sort of high up near the hills.
I cannot pretend I cannot see all the instruments behind you. I can see a guitar, a flute, a piano, and there's a saxophone case. And I know you studied musicology, I believe.
That's right. Yeah, I did a performance degree in clarinet, and then I did a master's degree in musicology, which is like the social history of music. I think this is a real example of following what you love and get really good at it, because that's what I did. And so it was all about the music for me. And people often ask me how that relates to what I do today. One of the big things I'll say is that I don't mind getting up and doing talks on stages, because I have many years of getting up and on stage and playing a clarinet or a saxophone. So there's definitely that. But I'm also aware that I'm a classically trained musician. And so for me, interpreting notes at speed and reacting to people around me whilst playing is the key thing about being a classical musician. I talk about jazz a lot as an analogy, because jazz musicians are phenomenal. They have to know their craft so well so that they can get up on a stage without the scaffolding of all the little notes and all the little dots, and play something amazing and make that look effortless. So jazz music is really hard. And yeah, I think about that a lot as a classical musician.
I have huge respect for musicians, because for many years when I was a child, my mom used to tell me that I was not a musician and I never learned an instrument. So I loved music, and I always respected and admired musicians. And just half a year ago, we bought a piano and I started learning. And now I'm even in a bigger admiration for musicians, because it is hard. Reading notes is hard.
It is. And I think that whole idea of mastery, like I mentioned before, actually being a musician and practicing a lot to get better is one of the best examples of that. There's other books. I think it's Drive, talking about being a tennis star and learning from, a very young age. And music is something that many of us can relate to, and how many hours of practice in a small room by yourself it might take to get better at what you do. I've got to say, another really important analogy, though, around music is that as a chamber musician, there's no prize for getting to the end of the piece first. You are playing with, along with your friends and your colleagues. And I think there's a really good reference in there to teamwork. When you're working together in a team, it feels really good. You've all got your bit, you've got your time to shine, you've got your time to support your colleagues. And yeah, there's no prizes for finishing first. You all cross the line together. So yeah, rich source of analogies. I think that's the biggest thing that I find about my music degree.
That's beautiful. And when I think about an orchestra or a band, everyone has their role and they play important role. The bass gives a structure, and other instruments have different role depending on the piece, and they know what role they play. And there's conductor helping them shine and be great together, and
Absolutely.
like leadership.
Well, that's right. And I think, Jakub, thinking about your role and what I do now is much more of the conductor about it. All those years of experience I've had as a musician, and I have got lots of years of delivering software and writing the code, but now it's just using that past experience to help others work well together and do great stuff together.
Since we moved to talking about engineering, and you just recently joined a new company as a head of engineering, and I wonder, what are your ways to navigate the first few weeks, first 90 days, first, maybe 2 months, 3 months? How do you approach it?
Well, yeah. So I'm head of engineering at Totara Learning. So a Wellington grown company that now is also based in the UK and in the US, but still an office in Wellington and lots of people based here. I think I said in a meeting the other day that I'd just gone through my first calendar month of being on board. So that's like my first 30 days. And I'm sure many people listening to this podcast will have thought about the first 90 days book that you can read, which can, it's got some great stuff in it, really can help you plan. But also, if you think that you're going to have a nice checklist, very spelled out of exactly what it is that you're going to do in the first 90 days, well, to be honest, I don't think that's very realistic. The important thing I think about the first 30 days is, there's just a lot of talking. It's a lot of meeting people and talking. So, when you arrive, you obviously bring yourself as an individual with a lot of skills. As you've been through an interviewing process, who you are and those skills have been very, very key. Like thinking about your values that you bring to every day, whether it's at home or work. I think that's really important. So as you walk through the door, whether it's a virtual door or an actual door for your new job, you bring those values and you bring that experience, and you start talking to key people to understand how it is that you can make a difference there. And that's certainly how I approach it. So yeah, a lot of talking so far. I think I've said the term mental models already. And I'm really inspired by John Cutler, who many people know as a product maestro. I don't know what a good word is to use, but an amazing guy. And seeing his boards and his stickies that he puts together and the lines between them, that's actually become much more of the way that I start thinking now, start arranging my thoughts. So I'm finding that building mental models of the organization structure, you can often see one in your HR system that's sort of got who reports to who, but that won't necessarily tell you about the software teams or which architect is working with someone. And all of those sort of structures are really important. But your sticky notes that you arrange, they can do that. What is it about the products that you sell and how your products pull together? What are the key entities that you need to know about? Like in a learning management software that we produce, it'll be things like certification, be things like the engagement and the community content. And there's all these sort of entities in that software that are important to learn. And I'm sort of doing these in a slightly random order, but as a senior leader in the company, it's also really important to be talking to the right people about what that strategy looks like for the company. So your business strategy, and there will be a technology strategy in there somewhere, whether it's explicit and written down and a little bit laminated for people to follow, or it'll be the thing that people do. And so you will find the engineering or the technology strategy when you've talked to enough people, because it's how people put together technology. Yeah.
And I guess there's the strategy that is documented somewhere in some shape or form, and there's the understanding of strategy, right? And difference between this.
It's a little bit like culture. Culture is what you do. You can aspire to have a culture, but if the behavior doesn't, the culture is actually the behavior that's happening. I think the same with strategy. You can aspire to have a strategy, But if actually you're delivering X when the strategy says deliver Y, well, you're not following along. Will Larson is one of the sort of trusted sources that I have for, and I look at his work. He's recently written about engineering executives, and he says, build a strategy. He says, don't write one from scratch. There will be one. You go and talk to people and you figure it out, and then you've got your base strategy, and then you can start iterating on it and pull it into what you want. So I found it's quite an interesting idea. Like you said, there's that implied strategy if there's not an explicit one, and you draw that out from those conversations initially.
So you join a new company, you ask questions, you take your notes, you map it to your mental models, you visualize it, you see some of the gaps. And how do you decide when is the right time to question some of it or to make some changes? Because of course you will never have all the context. You will never understand everything. How do you make this decision that, I need to make this change now?
Well, that's a great question. And as I go forward into my 16, 90 days, change will be something that I'll be wanting to broach. You mentioned questions, and I am never afraid to ask the curious questions, because I think anyone in a new job, like your fresh perspective and your fresh eyes are actually a real bonus to a company. So if you're feeling like a bit of a fraud as a newbie because you don't know everything yet, actually you can remind yourself that being you and asking the curious questions with that fresh pair of eyes, asking the questions, and everyone might just accept that something is done because it's always been done, and not sort of sat back to think about whether it might change. So I'll always ask questions. That will never stop. In terms of change, though, that is going to be complicated. If we go back to the first 90 days again, there's some advice in there. It's like, actually, if you find things that are perhaps small to change and easy to change, great. That's something you can do to make impact straight away. I guess a change that I would articulate there, and it's perhaps not so much about asking other people to change, but it's bringing some change to an org. I do really like to communicate out what I'm doing and what the groups I'm in, like the first team that I'm in, what we're doing. And often that's a change for people. They might not have seen that level of visibility before. So that's a level of change that I tend to bring straight away, because that's just me living my values of being as transparent as I can be. In terms of making a bigger change, that's something to really be considered about. And I think it's not something that you stomp in as a senior engineering leader and do by yourself. You meet the people, you ask the curious questions, you build the mental models, you dig around a bit, you think, the signal that I'm getting from this part of my engineering practice model, I'm getting a lot of signals there. That's something I think that I might like to concentrate on. Then you bring in your other experts, your architects, your agile leaders, your engineering managers, your boss who's maybe been thinking about this for a while too. So you start validating that. And just like in software development, you sort of validate early and often. One of the ways I like to do things is build some Post-its. And I love that Miro now has talk tracks. So I can do my Post-it magic about my mental models, and I can record a little talk track and push that out to people. It's like, this is what I'm thinking. Can we now talk about what you see in that? Am I on the right track? So it's quite iterative, and definitely don't want to make big changes fast and early, but you've got to be gathering the data in order to be well placed to do that at some point.
And depending on organization, I don't know if you found it before, some people just waiting for this new leader to come so that they can, make their own changes. I think sometimes it can be easy to get trapped into this, people influencing the new joiner to push for some changes, make some changes. And I think it's really important to understand what are we trying to solve? What is the problem? And where are we going? Where are we right now? And not to introduce change too early, because then it's very easy to lose the credibility and make a mess.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you can see that in two directions. You can see that perhaps from leadership when you walk in. I know in my case, my company were very generous. I interviewed for this role, was very happy with the way they interviewed me and the way I interviewed them to make that partnership. then I had a big break lined up on the other side of the world. So having hired me, I sort of said goodbye and, was offline for a good 2 or 3 months so they had plenty of time to think about things they might like me to help with at that time. So obviously you want to make changes, measured and considered changes with the right signals. And I really think that my leaders understand that. But the other problem in this can be your own self. You can be an enemy because you've recently probably come from another company where you've really been delivering value, because you've had the context, you're in the swing of things. So you really need to learn to rest comfortably with yourself, to go, you're doing the right thing, you're bringing value, and that will just continue to increase in the future, but not to rush. I think to go in and do some ill-considered things is damaging, and that damage takes a while to repair. I think you're better to create those connections, be a bit visible, become more approachable so people can keep giving you signals, and then make some considered changes further down the track. I think that's better sort of return on that investment there.
And you mentioned the recruitment process. And I wonder if there's some learning there when you are being recruited. How do you approach this from your point of view as a candidate? Is there anything that you're looking for in the interview process? Anything that you are mindful about? How do you choose a role for yourself?
Having been in the position where I've now done a lot of recruiting myself, I guess I have a bit of a bias for what I like to see during a recruitment process, right from the ad and the language and the job advertisement. Is that friendly? Is it using I guess, gender-friendly language? Does it seem open and approachable and flexible as a working environment? Is there a list of, you must do this, or is there a list of outcomes that you're invited to sort of generously talk about how you're going to contribute towards that? I love adverts that have the phrase about, you may not be able to do 100% of this, but that's okay. We also are happy to upskill you in those things. So that sort of approach to me is really important, even when I'm deciding whether I want to apply. What else do I like to see? It really is that two-way process. So I will want to do my research about the company, as a company will also want to do research on me. So I'll be looking at the website. Are there values? Because that would be nice. What are those values? And is that something I can get behind? For me, it's what does the company do and how does that feature in my values? So a learning management system, always learning. That really corresponded with what I like to do. So that was important. And then obviously that whole candidate experience of how do you feel when you're talking to these people, because these are people you're going to be working with. So I really want them to enjoy working with me, and I want to enjoy working with them. And I also don't want us to try and pretend we're completely different people while we're doing that. I want us to be who we are. So absolutely, my recent experience with interviewing for Totara was exactly that. And it was fabulous to meet as many people as I did. Then you get into a company and you can be comfortable that what you saw during the interview process was what you saw, is what you're going to see and how you're going to work going forward.
And of course, there are going to be things that you discover that maybe you should have asked about. But I do agree that the whole experience gives you the vibe. And if do the interviewers talk about their mistakes? If they ask about the values, can they articulate how they follow the values? How often they give feedback and what the quality of feedback is after every stage of the interview? I think that is crucial.
So much so, and that sort of human approach. And I'll give you a little example that I actually had COVID for the first time in October last year while I was interviewing. I was laid low for a long time and I needed to put the brakes on because I lay down a lot and didn't have a brain cell to rub together for a few days after that. So that human approach for how we were able to pause the process and pick it up when I felt right. I also think that if anyone that you're interviewing with says that things are 100% perfect, then I think that's probably not correct. And so asking what the challenges are. and how the role you're interviewing for might support those challenges. Again, with the research that you do on a company, if you have years of experience in the trade, some people have worked there before and they've got some little stories or whatever, be brave and ask about those. Situations change, environments change, personnel and culture changes. And I think it's really good to front foot that to make sure that you've ironed out all of those things. Something for me, which I've never asked during interviews previously, just because of the environments that I'd worked in, I asked quite a lot about the commercials and the financial future, because I'd been in a situation last year working for a sort of startup to scale up where unfortunately the commercials didn't stack up. The company still runs, still love them dearly, but they couldn't run at the scale they wanted to. And so getting a lot more stuck into the commercial side of a business and looking at its future was something I was keen to know as well. We talked about learning, talked about, well, not mistakes, but things that haven't been so great before. And that was one of the ways that I played that forward to understand what a new role would look like.
And I know that one of the topics you are passionate about and you talk about quite often, and I think it plays quite well with interviewing and starting a new role, is an imposter syndrome that all of us feel from time to time in different contexts. Tell us more about it.
I remember the first time I went to a conference, I remember very well. I think it was 2015. It was RubyConf in Melbourne, and a developer got up on stage and talked about this thing called imposter syndrome. And it was amazing. I was like, oh, this feeling that I've had, I am not the only person out of the, 6 billion people in the world to feel it. Seems a little bit obvious, that part in retrospect. But yeah, amazing to understand, that idea that you feel like a fraud. And people who are in minority groups at the time often feel that, they're sitting in a room where they don't see as many people that look like them. Someone like myself coming from a music background, I'm like, well, I don't have the computer science degree. I can say binomial tree, but I'm a bit shaky on what that actually means and if it's something that I really need to know. So in the end, I figured out that really probably the single best thing you can do to still experience imposter syndrome, don't think it ever goes away, but to just move through it and get on and do the things you want to in your life and your career, is to actually reflect on what your successes are. If you can keep a little journal or a kudos folder when people are sending you feedback, ask for feedback if you're not getting it, but then you can go back and remember all the times that you did bring value. You remember that yourself. That little kudos folder or however you put it together is also great for a recruitment process, because you've got all of these examples of your success stories to bring out as well. And, on a day when you've been in the job for a while and you're just feeling, oh, this is all a bit rough, you've got that to go back to as well. So I don't know that feels like a secret sauce, but I think we all feel like imposters, and let's just remind ourselves of the good stuff that we do. Yeah.
And if I can offer a tip here as well, what I like to do is remember one of my strengths that I'm confident about, and how I can use some of my strengths right now. So, it's something I can rely on that I know is going to help, and then build myself up.
Absolutely. And I think, we talked about feedback a little bit, and I think that's so important, because sometimes it's a little bit difficult to realize that something you do yourself is even a strength. Sometimes you do need feedback to tell you what your strengths are, because you're you do what you do. And so perhaps understanding that you're very approachable, and that's a strength. It's really good to have feedback, and then you've got that strength to reflect back on. So I absolutely agree. Yeah.
And I also just remembered one of the principles from Ray Dalio's work. I don't know if you follow Ray Dalio. He
Yes,
talks about pain and how pain can be useful, and feeling imposter syndrome can feel like pain, because we are discovering some of the weaknesses of ours, or we discover some of the gaps that we might have in competence, in experience. And he talks that pain on itself is useless, but pain plus reflection equals progress.
Absolutely. Look, and I would like to qualify, I do think it depends on the amount of pain. And it's a bit like, say, if you're exercising and, you want micro tears in your muscles, you don't want something to be completely defunct. But yeah, absolutely, it's moving, you know, a little bit further into that zone of discomfort and that's sort of how you know you're learning. I do like a motto or two, but my absolute favorite one is a paraphrase of a Nelson Mandela quote. And it's, if you're not winning, you're learning. And so winning is great, but you know, if you're essentially not winning, if something isn't going very well, you're not winning, then you can learn from that. So it's the pain plus progress. Winning or not winning turns into learning.
And if I reflect on my last, maybe 6 months and stepped into a new role, and I had my scope of work increased a lot, and I started looking after some of the teams or areas that I had very low level of experience. And I had to learn how to deal with that. I wonder, what do you think? Do you need to have all of the expertise? Do you need to know all about engineering, for example, in a new role? Do you need to be able to code every day to keep up to date, to be a good leader, a good head of engineering? What's your approach?
The really short answer to that is no. But let me expand a bit more. And I do think it might depend somewhat on scale. Say if you're a CTO of a small startup, then yes, likelihood is that you're going to be the engineer on the tools as well, or at least one of the engineers. So absolutely. The scale that I work at, you know, the engineering departments tend to be about 30 people, maybe more. So it's a little bit different. I spent a lot of years on the tools, but those years are now receding into my rear vision mirror. So the tools and the techniques that I use then are applicable as concepts, I think, still these days, but certainly not in hands-on. So I think I'd be doing my people a real disservice if I said, don't worry, I'll dive in there and encode that for you. I just think I would be undervaluing the amazing contribution that these experts bring if I also think that I'm well equipped to do that exact thing as well. My skills now are based on the engineering experience in the past, plus the leadership and sort of communication and team aspects that I've learned since. And so that means just in a lucky position that a lot of the time I get to rely on some really cool experts, some lead engineers, principal engineers, engineering management people, the cloud team and the amazing stuff they're doing with infrastructure. And look, technology is changing so often. The fact that, you know, with the breadth of technology, and we talk about, you know, data science is now an arm of engineering. Well, you know, what senior technology leader is going to be able to easily pick up that in detail in order to do it well? So the breadth is increasing, the depth in terms of how many years technology has been going for, the amount of change is incredible. So I think it would be a very hard job to be an amazing engineer and an amazing senior leader at the same time. Maybe not impossible, but pretty hard.
And maybe last question, Rachel. If you were now stepping into leadership role, what would be a piece of advice you would give some?
Don't forget the bit that is leadership, because I think that servant leadership is an amazing thing where you're working among people and you're leveraging their expertise, and that's really important. But also you are a leader and you do need to be able to remember to bring people forward with you. You need to perhaps go and do some research, come back and ask the curious questions. So there is a leadership aspect in there to forget. You're not there to be the world's best collaborator and let everyone else sort it out. You are there to make sure there's a good result, pull it forward and examine the way you're doing things so that you and your team can be the best that you can be.
Beautiful. And it sounds like a good place to finish for today. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, your wisdom with us today. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks very much, Jakub. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed Rachel's stories as much as I did. This is TechWaka, a podcast where we explore journeys of New Zealand tech leaders. You can find us on every major podcasting platform and on LinkedIn and Instagram. Thanks.